Good morning, everybody. I'm Cutsy, and welcome. Today, it is True Crime Tuesday, so let's get her started. First thing, I just want to give a little update on a story we've been following out of Lansdowne, Nova Scotia. That is the case of missing Lilly, 6 years old, and Jack, 4, out of their home. They have just disappeared off the face of the earth. The dogs tracked scent all the way to the end of the driveway where it stopped, and it is now starting to be believed that this is an abduction and that these children have been missing for a month, and they are just now deciding to take that into account, which I had a whole bunch of thoughts about that. But anyway, now one of the places that I've been going and listening just for another view is a channel called Michelle After Dark, and she was on this morning, and she had found an interview that had been done with allegedly Daniel Martel, which is the stepfather or the partner, whatever you want to call him, of the 2 children. It's of his cousin, and she very much reiterated a lot of the things that we talked about yesterday, that Granny talked about in her live yesterday, etc. Plus some more added detail about a little bit of insight into the reason possibly why the mother, Malaya, left, hasn't come back, hasn't spoken to anyone, has broken up with Daniel, and is not allowing him to see the baby. It's either them or CPS or both, I'm not sure. But whatever the case, they have not come back, and this cousin has very much shed some light, like I said, on this relationship and what could possibly be the cause. I had mentioned this yesterday, that possibly one of the reasons why Mom is so feeling the way that she is she has been scolded or warned before by Grandma, her mother, that they are not taking care of the children correctly, that they are not paying enough attention, that they are whatever they're doing. So I implore you to listen to Michelle After Dark's video this morning. I will put the link in the details section of this video. I really think it's a good listen if you're into this case. And said there's no proof that this really is a cousin. There's nothing. This is just speculation, but it really has a bunch of bells going off, and it really reiterates a lot of the things that we are all thinking. So, like I said, check that out. There'll be her link and her channel link and the video link will be in my description. So now, next on my list for True Crime Tuesday for my little podcast project, I had gotten done watching a documentary on Netflix, and it's called Fred and Rose West, A British Horror Story. Now, I watched a documentary on these people years ago. It was like on A&E or something like that, and I remember that the documentary was told from the viewpoint of their 2 youngest children. I will also be putting a link to another documentary that talks about a little bit of the pre-story of these 2 people. But anyway, this documentary was told from the viewpoint of their 2 youngest children, who inevitably were the reason why this Red Rum case got solved. They would joke around at school or talk about at school that their parents would tell them, you better behave or you're going to end up in the garden just like your sister. And it was always foreseen as probably just some joke, a family joke. And in fact, when the father was eventually questioned by police about all of this, school, that was one of the things he said, this is just a family joke, it's just teasing, no big deal. So this case came about in 1994. And now there's a new Netflix documentary. It's a 3-parter. And they are, in this documentary, they have released the audio recordings of Fred West. And it is just mind-blowing. Now, like I said, it's been like 15 years since I saw the first documentary. So this originally starts in Gloucester in 1994 at number 25 Cromwell Street. Reporters start hearing and noticing that police are at this address, and they are digging up the garden at this house. When questioned, police would not say a word, so reporters had no idea what was going on. So a little history is Fred and Rose West had met when Rose was 15 years old. I believe they said it was 15. And they had a blended family of 10 children together. Some were children that they had together. Some were children that they had kind of adopted. They had just taken up residence in their house, etc. Now again, the younger children would go to school and say that if they misbehaved, they'd end up under the patio with the rest of the kids, like their sister Heather. Well, all of a sudden, people start realizing, wait a minute, we have not seen Heather in a really long time. Is this a joke? She had just completely vanished off the face of the earth. Now, after doing some digging, the police find out that she is basically just gone without a trace. They arrest Fred on February 24th, 1994. And they questioned as to why Heather had been missing since 1986. Let me say that again, 1986. So, wow. And why no one had ever reported her missing. He was staunch in saying that it was just a family joke, and they ended up having to release him because there just was no evidence. So reporters started to dig, and they found out that what the police were looking for was Heather. And after a few days of digging, Fred asked to talk to the police. He tells them that he has taken Heather's life, but that they weren't digging in the right spot. And with his attorney and advocate, Fred starts to gradually start answering questions. Now, we don't often follow cases. Most of our cases are out of the U.S., but this case is out of the U.K., and that's something I noticed in this, is that they get an advocate. So he not only had a defense attorney, but he had an advocate who does not fall under like attorney-client privilege, which will be important later on, but is there to help the person get through the system, get through talking to who they need to talk to, telling truths when they need to tell truths, having protection, etc. So anyway, he claimed that he didn't mean to hurt Heather, that she was out of control. He had told her, you either do as I say or leave. He said he'd lost control of his thoughts at that point. He was so frustrated, he took some electrical wire, tied it around her neck to make sure that she was not alive. He also said that he used a bread knife on her. He went into the kitchen to find something to make her smaller, let's say, to put her in pieces so that she was easier to bury. And it was noted that he was completely calm when he was recounting this story. And everyone in that room said that it just chilled them right to the bone. Next, they introduced Rose. And it was reported that she screamed and was out of control when he confessed. It was believed at that time that she had nothing to do with hurting Heather, and that she was just beside herself that he had done this. Now, the more police kept digging, it became painfully obvious that the reason that Fred was probably so forthright about what happened with Heather is because he figured if he told them exactly where she was, that they would stop digging. Later that night, they did find Heather's remains, and Rose still had no comment but claimed innocence. She and her children were placed in a safe house upon her being released. What they did not know is police had bugged the house that they were staying in. Now, reporters started interviewing neighbors, and the Wests had upstairs boarders. They were told that there were always lots of men coming and going from the house. One of the tenants talked about how much Fred and Rose showed love to each other. That it was obvious, though, that Rose ruled that house. The same boarder also said that she remembered Fred making it really clear, making a point to tell her to be very careful, to use a different door because he was laying a patio outside. So this must have been, obviously, when he was burying someone. She also spoke to another tenant. Her name was Shirley Robinson. She was 18 years old. She stayed across the hall from her. And this gal was pregnant. And she ended up telling her that it was Fred's baby. But this tenant didn't believe her at the time. Now back to Fred. Unfortunately for Fred, they kept digging. And they ended up finding 3 thigh bones. And since most human beings only have 2, they knew that they had to keep digging. But Fred kept swearing that Heather was the only one. When the house was investigated, they ended up finding a room upstairs. It was set up like a bar, and it led into their bedroom. Upon further inspection, they found that there was sound and video equipment wired in to this bedroom also. And it looked to be that Fred had built this in his house as his own kind of den of inequity to serve his needs. So investigators, upon finding all of this, decide, we're just going to make him comfortable because he seems to like to talk. And they're just going to let him talk. Sometimes that's the best way to find out the truth from somebody. And they let him know that they had found another bone. He finally admitted that it was from Shirley Robinson, the pregnant resident. He had said they'd had an affair behind Rose's back, and when Rose was in the hospital giving birth, Shirley confronted Fred about telling Rose that this was his baby. He said he had hit her and wrapped wiring around her neck, ending her life, just like Heather. Now this is important. Next thing he says is, what am I going to do now? That's 3. Oh wait, I meant 2. There's 2, not 3. Nervous laugh. Red flag. Oopsie. Then he finally admitted to 3 after being questioned. And he said that he didn't know that girl's name. And whom we later find out is Allison Chambers, which was a friend of Shirley's. Now, after not finding anyone else in the patio and digging that whole thing up, police decide that they're going to start with the house. And so they start digging up the house. Now, the basement. Now, meanwhile, Rose, remember, is being recorded, and her conversations are being recorded. And one of the things is that they both had said, he stated he had trained Rose to be who he wanted. And she admitted that he liked to watch her with other men. And according to her, that she did it because she loved him and she was brainwashed, and that she had eventually became a prostitute. Yet Fred said she was fine with it for 23 years. So was she a victim or was she an accomplice? Fred started to talk about how and why he picked the women that he did. He said he looked for women ages 15 to 17 that could be easily taken and prostituted. He was a groomer. So he never wanted to know their names. He said he didn't harm every single girl. Some he just slept with and dropped back off. But he said the ones he did red rum, he did it so that Rose wouldn't find out that he was with them. Eventually they were able to identify 9 victims out of the basement. Now during all of this happening, a woman popped up that had been a nanny for their kids. He'd asked her to join he and Rose, and she said absolutely no and quit. Months later, she saw them out and about in town. She didn't think anything about it. They asked her to get in the car with them, go for a ride and talk, and she did. Well, they ended up taking her into the woods. They ended up bashing her in the head, tying her up, and taking her back to their home with them. Rose was in the car, and Carol was abducted the same way the other women were. She said they both assaulted her. and that they were going to put her in the cellar and end her, bury her in the patio. Luckily, she escaped. Now, she pressed charges, and the only thing that happened were Fred and Rose were both fined 25 pounds. But one thing it did show was that Rose was involved in this. And this was not at the beginning. It was right smack dab in the middle of all of this. So she was there. It's believed that Carol was a practice run for some of these where they started to pick people up, but she got away. Now, Rose had a friend that also stated to police that Rose told her that she did ride with Fred because women would be more trusting with a female in the car. And Fred starts to slowly realize that Rose was involved. Realized that investigators knew that Rose was involved, They also end up learning that Fred had a wife and daughter who had been missing for years previously to Rose. Fred led them to a house where he buried her. And then to another body of a nanny that they had. The count was now up to 11. Then a little girl by the name of Charmaine's name was brought up, whom I believe was Fred's daughter with this first wife that was missing. And she lived with Fred and Rose at a previous residence. In fact, Fred was in prison for a while, so it was just Rose and this little girl there, and Heather, the baby. And this little girl was only 7 or 8 at the time. And Fred eventually ended up leading them to where she was buried in the back of that old house also. The one that they lived at previously to the one in Gloucester. And it was reported that Rose bullied this little girl and abused her. And like I said, it's suspected that he was in prison at the time of her unaliving. So who did it have? Who's number one suspect? Come on. Their children, the 2 youngest, the ones that eventually were the ones that helped get their parents arrested, explained Rose as having an explosive temper, but they were afraid to tell anyone about the violent abuse. And their names were May and Stephen West. They were in the original documentary. And May spoke of S.A., of herself and Heather, by their father. And Fred refused to comment on that. Now, with Charmaine, we're at 12 victims. Rose still would not admit to anything, and Fred ends up taking all the heat. And that's when he finally realized he had protected her for absolutely nothing. Now, I'm going to stop. I don't want to spoil the ending, but this is definitely a must-see if you're into older true crime. Like I said, this came to light all in 1994, 95. And I cannot find the documentary that I watched that originally introduced me to this case, but I did find another one, like I said, that gives a little bit of the backstory of these 2 people, and I will also include that in my description, so you can watch that also. It's really quite interesting. This case has so many twists and turns in it, and it really, you kind of go back and forth trying to think, who's the victim, who's the perpetrator, was this woman convinced and abused so badly by her husband that she would do anything for him, including help him pick up young women to hurt? Or did 2 sociopaths unfortunately meet and create even bigger crimes than they would have alone? Definitely check this Netflix documentary out, and I hope you guys have a great day, and that's it for now. Cutsy out.